I want to introduce our next speaker, Nav Aggarwal. Nav is a successful entrepreneur and is the joint owner of two companies, A&A Pharmachem and International Pharmaceutical Generics. Pharmachem, a fine chemical distribution business, was founded by his brother Akhil in 1993. Nav joined him in 1996 and built the business to revenues of over $80 million. International Pharmaceutical Generics, a business that developed generic drugs, was again co-founded in 2004. Revenues in 2012 are expected to be $20 million. His company has been doing business in India for over 20 years, with sales in excess of $50 million, with over 25 supplier relationships. Nav's parents are from northern India, and they immigrated to Canada in 1964. He obtained an honors degree in mathematics with a minor in computer science from the University of Waterloo and successfully passed the nationwide CA exams. Nav is on the board of many associations, including the Nepean City Soccer Association, Nepean Minor Hockey Association, and the local East Indian Community Association. He is based out of Ottawa, where he lives with his family. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Nav Aggarwal.
I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear my little talk. Thank the professor for inviting me here. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. This is just a discussion of my story and give you an idea of what doing business in India has been like for us for over 20 years. Ours is the outsourcing model. We bring stuff from India into Canada. I'm going to talk about some of the challenges we faced over the past 20 years. I'm going to tell you what stage we're at today and how I got there. It's kind of an interesting story. And we'll talk a little bit more about the advantages of working with India, the challenges, and what we have done as a company to overcome the challenges of doing business in India. So basically, as was in the intro, my brother and I set up a chemical distribution company in the early 90s. The company basically sources ingredients or raw materials from all over the world, primarily from India for the generic farm industry. And we also supply ingredients in the OTC industry, so we're talking like acetaminophen, which is what's used to make Tylenol, ibuprofen. We're into nutraceuticals, so you've heard of echinacea, sports nutrition. We have a whole range of products that we import from all over the world, and we supply to manufacturers in Canada who then put it under their own labels and bottles. What happened to us then, the company was doing well as an ingredients company over the past so many years, but then what happened was we ran into an issue where we would develop the market for these Indian suppliers of ingredients in the early 90s, and we developed such a nice market for them that they started looking at how much money we were making, and they said, this isn't going to work anymore. So they opened up their own office in Toronto or New Jersey and started servicing our customers directly. So the ingredient model or distribution model was a good model in the early 90s, but the world's getting much smaller with the internet and so on and so forth. So we had to vertically integrate and change our business model. And then we started a company called IPG, or International Pharmaceutical Generics. That model is a vertical integration. So instead of supplying just the powder, we actually supply the pills. So we get Health Canada approval. I mean, it's about a 3 or 4 year cycle to get approval from Health Canada to bring in a finished dosage form. It's not easy. We have to go through clinical trials to prove that our finished dosage is equivalent to the brand's dosage and all that other stuff. But when you add that extra layer of investment, that creates a barrier to entry and a value, or IP, that we created in our business model. So it's been quite successful. We have about 15 molecules, 15 finished dosage forms currently approved in Canada, currently selling. And we have a pipeline of about 60 or 70 more products coming through, primarily in the generic drug space and the OTC space. So kind of put things in a kind of a real world scenario for you guys. I brought some samples here. Now, this is real world. This is real world. Now, this is acetaminophen powder. This is a Life brand acetaminophen tablet. So for the past 10 years, A&A Pharmachem has been supplying powder to every private label generic brand in Canada. So if you've taken a Life brand, Equate brand, Kirkland brand, you name the brand, we supplied the pure product, all from India. Okay? So that's what A&A Pharmachem currently does. We bring container loads in, we sell it to a manufacturer in Canada who basically tablets it and packages it, and the same manufacturer will sell it to all the chains. That's how it works. So that's the A&A story. Ibuprofen tablets. We supply currently 90% of every ibuprofen tablet consumed in Canada. So we have the approvals. So we bring in this case, it's not ingredients. We actually bring in the tablets. We have container loads of tablets that come in here. They go to the same company who packages it, the acetaminophen, but they just package it already tableted for the chains. So these are just 2 products out of maybe 50 that we import, where you can kind of see, and these are all coming from India. So India's, I tell you, I mean, acetaminophen, for example, 10 years of doing business and hardly any quality problems. So, the perception that it's India, this and that, I can tell you in the pharma industry, there are no concerns. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a real life. Now, the questions people ask is, how did we get into this business? How do you get into supplying tablets? I'm a chartered accountant. How can you do that? Well, to briefly tell you the story, 1964, my father came from India as a high school teacher. At 65, I was born. We moved to Ottawa. He got a job in the federal government. And education was very important, of course, for all Indian parents. They want their children to be educated. So that was a big focus. And most of the parents in those days, and a lot of you Indian guys will understand, the parents wanted their kids to be doctors, engineers, or IT professionals. Like that was sort of your thing, right? That was just the way it was. But my father was always very different. Though he worked in the government for so many years, he told us, I don't want you to become a doctor. I don't want you to become an engineer. I don't want you to do these things. He said, the only thing you have to do is think of a profession where you can make money while you're sleeping. And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, real estate and business. So he said, if you're a doctor, you only make money when you bill. And if you're not billing, if you're on vacation or you're sleeping, you ain't making any money. So his whole focus was a business angle, whereas all my friends were becoming doctors, we were moving into this whole world of being in business and so on. That was the first thing that drove our agenda. He eventually got into real estate from the government. We then, so I went to Waterloo, got my CA, my brother got his CA, he got his MBA, my sister's a CA, so we're all, boring people in that sense. I was 22, my sister was, my brother was 23, and we were both working in public accounting firms in Ottawa. We'd done well, and my dad sat the 2 of us down and said, I want you to quit your jobs right now. We got our CAs, we worked hard, and he said, the longer you stay in a public accounting firm, the more they're going to pay you. You're going to get married, you're going to have responsibilities, and you'll never leave. And you'll never do business. You're 22, you're 23, quit your jobs right now, we're going to do business. You've got your education, so if anything happens, you can always go back to work. You'll always get a job as a CA. You're never going to have a problem getting employment. So we quit our jobs. So he had developed a little service station business, had 3 little gas stations, and we went into real estate development, and we bought land, rezoned it, built stations, went up to about 14 locations in a couple of years throughout Ontario, Esso, Shells, Petrocans, the whole. But what happened was all our eggs were in real estate, and it was a very capital-intensive industry, and we really needed to diversify ourselves. So my brother and I sat down and said, look, what else can we do? And we thought of international trade. And if earlier in the slide, I think 1991, India had sort of opened up its borders a little bit. So we were looking at what else can we import? What can we do? And so we explored importing ceiling fans from India, bicycle helmets from India. We were into all kinds of stuff, And we had a friend of ours in the farm industry, and he said there's a real need for less expensive ingredients. Everything that was being supplied came from Europe, from the US, and so we saw that opportunity and basically started supplying the ingredients, finding the ingredients, and the rest is history, I guess, as you can say. So that's sort of the story of how we got into it. And then, the question is why did India work for us? And I think India worked for a few reasons. One reason is the cost of goods, of course, was very good in the early 90s. It worked well for us. The other big thing that India had, especially in these knowledge industries, like I would say, like the information technology industries, is the English language was critical. Because in the pharma industry, there's a lot of documentation required. There's a lot of real mastery of the English language was critical. And the Chinese didn't have that. The Chinese are still way behind India when it comes to the pharma industry. So that was something that I think we were able to leverage on. The other thing India, of course, had was a massive talent pool, of course, very intelligent people. I mean, the big job was they had to duplicate generic drugs, and they were able to develop it internally themselves. They were able to make ingredients. So they had the talent pool to make it happen. I think the other big thing India had was this, they had a real entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, it's being a democracy for many years. I think the Chinese were less entrepreneurial. India had a lot of business people who were willing to invest and take chances. There was a large availability of capital as well out of India. They had R&D zones, et cetera. So it was a really ripe time to get in with India, and it worked very well for us. But as we kind of got in, we started to have problems. I mean, there are a lot of challenges dealing with India on a micro level. I mean, fundamental problems, for example, is customer service isn't a priority for India. Bad news, they won't even tell you about it till the last minute. I mean, they overcommit, we'll ship, no problem, we'll ship, and it never leaves. It's just, it was really a challenge overcoming that cultural difference. Essentially, they were not transparent, and even today we face it. Of course, it's improved over 20 years, but it's a constant struggle to get the right information from these guys. The other big problem, and even today, there's a lack of empowerment in India, meaning that all the power lies with the owner. Most of these are family businesses, and all their so-called senior management, they do a lot of the groundwork, but when it comes to actually making that decision, it all has to go right to the top. And India, again, it's changing, but what they typically do is they don't necessarily give these positions to the people who deserve it. They give it to people who've been in the company the longest, which isn't really beneficial in the long run, but it's changing. I think they've overcome that. There's corruption problems, which we have to deal with. Our suppliers always give us, have concerns about that. The legal system is always a challenge for us. I mean, anything we do enforceability is a big problem. So, I mean, we try to structure our deals differently, but that's a big problem for us. And of course, there's the distance and the time difference and all that other stuff. So these have been common challenges for us. But I look at it one way. These challenges, in fact, are an opportunity for us because it's a barrier to entry for other people. So if you're patient, you're hardworking, and you persevere, you can overcome those challenges, and we have. To some extent, and it allows us to be successful, whereas other people trying to get into India are having a much harder time. So what have we done to alleviate this issue to some extent? Now, one thing that I think you need to do if you're looking at going to India and bringing products from India or doing India, you must travel. You need to be in India every quarter, 3 times a year, because you need to build personal relationships with senior management in India. If you don't, you're not going to get anywhere. That's very critical. The other thing we do from a customer perspective is if India says something's coming in 6 weeks, I tell my customers in Canada it's coming in 8 weeks. Because one thing about India is there's a lot of holidays that you don't even know about exists. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I don't blame them, but there's so many, how do you say, India's got all these different cultures in it or religions, and they try to appease everybody. And so there's a lot of holidays, there's shutdowns, there's always a problem. There's political issues are going on. In Hyderabad recently, there was, the plants were shut down for a few days. So there's always problems. So you got to build in some lead time. The other thing that we did, and I wouldn't say it's a must, but all things being equal, the senior management in our team are all of East Indian origin. So these are guys who worked in the pharma industry in India, immigrated to Canada, and they were looking for opportunities. And we saw these were great guys because they understand the culture, they can speak the language of the manufacturers in India, they get things done. And they don't mind traveling either because they're familiar with that environment. So that's what we did. Again, all things being equal, certainly if I have someone who's non-East Indian origin who's more competent, I'm going to take him. But all things being equal, I think that'll help you down the road. The only other few things that we do is we do have a presence in India. We have a small office in India to deal with stuff on immediate requirements. So I suggest that for anybody doing that. And we have really robust internal systems in Canada. So when we have project management, it's a big part of our thing. Conference calls on a regular basis, that kind of stuff. So that's what we have done to kind of to make the process of bringing products in from India less painful. But as you can see, it is working. So sort of just kind of go on. I mean, as we have evolved, new challenges have emerged from India. And part of these challenges are a function of the fact that India is growing so successfully that some of the companies that we dealt with 20 years ago no longer want to do business with us because we're too small. And Canada as a market, it's very frustrating for us today because for us to get some product delivered to us, they'd rather prioritize an American customer or a European customer over us. 10 years ago, any export business was great business. Today, they prioritize. So it's an ongoing challenge for us to convince these companies who we've dealt business with for so many years to work with us. Other issues we have as well is the Indian domestic market is so huge that many of these companies are saying, why do I have to sell my stuff outside? They can sell it inside, and the margins are actually quite good. So we're battling with that as well. And the last kind of thing that's a new challenge for us is many of these Indian companies are very successful and full of a lot of cash. And they're buying up US companies, marketing companies, and they're trying to go direct to retail right from India. Now, where we bring in some value is a lot of these companies prefer to deal with us because we have a local presence, but that's an ongoing challenge because they're going direct. So anyway, that sort of summarizes some of the new challenges we're facing today. But in summary, I'd like to say that doing business in India has been very successful for us. We're living proof. We do a tremendous amount of business in India. But it's hard work. You must persevere, and you need to be there on a regular basis to make things work effectively. Thank you.
I think it's a great story, right, of the evolution of entrepreneurship in India, right? There used to be a day when you could go to another country and make a ton of money because of information asymmetries. Those days are gone, right? Today, you have to be able to add value. You have to be able to create value. You have to be able to capture value. And it's not just in the idea, right? It's in the doing that really matters. I think that's what Nav really kind of did a great job of telling us, is that the nuts and bolts of the doing, the actual tinkering, the actual relationships, the actual managing of things that emerge, that's how you make money in places like India and even other places, right? The doing of strategy.